David Ingram and the Lost Cities of Native North America by D.W. Draffin. The year is 1568, and Mary, Queen of Scots, has just escaped prison. But Elizabeth I, Queen of England, has more on her mind than her troublesome cousin. She has also set her sights on the wealth of the slave trade and the opportunities of the New World. Elizabeth makes an important decision. She reverses her strategy of keeping peace with the Spanish. Over their protests, she allows Captain John Hawkins to resume his efforts in bringing African slaves to New World plantations, voyages which often return 60% profits on his return. But this is not the story of either Queen Mary, nor Queen Elizabeth, nor even John Hawkins. This is instead the tale of one of the common sailors on a ship in John Hawkins' fleet. His name was David Ingram, and what he and his two companions allegedly witnessed before they returned to their homes in England was something that only a handful of people outside the native populations of North America ever saw. We know quite a lot about the details leading up to Ingram's adventure. Hawkins was a crown favorite in 1567, and his journey was well documented. His flagship was a carrack leased from Elizabeth herself, Jesus of Lubeck. Of the 6 other ships, Judith was captained by Hawkins' cousin Francis Drake. They sailed south to Guinea, where they encountered Portuguese slaving ships. Defeating these, they took on between 400 to 500 slaves they found in the holds, refilled their stores, and crossed the Atlantic. Selling the slaves at the ports of New Spain was never easy. The Treaty of Tordesillas wasn't quite 100 years old, and although it hadn't been signed by an English monarch, it had been enforced over the decades with papal authority. It granted to Spain a comprehensive monopoly on this region of the New World. But the newly rebellious Protestants of England found all kinds of advantages, ignoring papal edicts on the high seas. So even though Hawkins was breaking Spanish law and challenging the traditional Spanish monopoly of trade in New Spain, he sold his slaves and other goods to the merchants and officials of Santo Domingo in today's Dominican Republic at a discount, presenting accounts from Spanish administrators of other New World cities of his good conduct and fair trade practices. From there, the fleet proceeded to Cartagena. Yet, near the end of their expedition, a storm sent the damaged ships into the nearest port, San Juan de Ulua, on the modern Mexican Gulf coast of Veracruz. Other ships joined them. Spanish ships. At first, the two forces observed an uneasy truce, but it could not last. In the English accounts of the following conflict, they naturally described the Spaniards as the treacherous aggressors, while the English were merely peaceful slave merchants. Yet Spanish accounts describe the good fortune of their naval commander, who had specifically been sent by the Spanish crown to the West Indies to stop foreign merchants from encroaching on their territory. Fighting soon broke out. The ships turned their guns on each other, and the Spanish forces gained control of the shore batteries. This proved a decisive turn in the battle, and the English were slaughtered, losing most of their fleet and 320 of their sailors to only a single sunk ship and 20 deaths on the Spanish side. The dismasted Jesus of Lubeck was abandoned, and the remaining English sailors were crowded aboard the 2 small ships that remained, Drake's Judith and Minion, which Hawkins captained after losing his flagship. Hawkins knew he couldn't carry this many sailors across the sea on only 2 small ships. His troubles only grew worse when Drake abandoned Minion to fend for itself, crossing back to England alone. That was when Hawkins decided to return to the Mexican coast a few miles further north and deposit 114 more sailors there, with promises to someday return and rescue them. Of this extraordinary action, Ingram's is not the only account. The interviews and confessions of several other members of these crews were recorded when the Inquisition came to Mexico 3 years later, finding many of the Protestant English refugees heretics and condemning them to torture, and even in one case to be burnt at the stake. Not all the men Hawkins left behind were volunteers. Many were forced off the ships to what they believed was their imminent doom. And for many of them, they were correct. Immediately set upon by Spaniards and local Chichimec nomads, the Englishmen had little in the way of weapons or supplies. Those who weren't killed began to starve. A dispute arose between the survivors. There were those who wanted to immediately give up and go south to the known evils of the Spaniards in San Juan de Ulua. But another group said they would take their chances to the north, where they hoped the English and their French allies might save them. They didn't know where such salvation might be, only that it was far away. The only resource that Hawkins had given each of them were bolts of fine cloth that they may use to trade. The party divided, but several days later, nearly all those who had attempted to go north appeared in Veracruz at San Juan de Ulua, surrendering with the others to the Spanish garrison there. But an even smaller party continued on up the Mexican coast. According to David Ingram, he may have lost another party member or two to disease or even marriage along the way, but he and his 2 companions, Richard Brown and Richard Twide, soldiered on past all difficulties, walking the entire length of the Gulf Coast to Florida. From there, learning of the fishing outpost of Cape Breton in Newfoundland, they decided that this would be their goal. But reaching the far-off outpost was a matter of a 3-year journey. Finally, after walking over 3,000 miles and witnessing a North America populated by advanced cities and civilizations that few outsiders ever saw, the 3 men finally did appear in Newfoundland and were sailed to New Haven by the French, then repatriated to England on a ship soon after. Sir Francis Walsingham, Queen Elizabeth's secretary, but popularly considered her spymaster, located the pub-famous Ingram a number of years later and interviewed him about his journey, attempting to learn if the Crown might send settlers or even undesirables to this new world. The account that Walsingham recorded is presented here in its entirety. While this document has been treated with suspicion in the centuries since, those who believe in Ingram's stories point to his knowledge of the geography of the eastern seaboard, with its great bays and rivers, and his comments about the great whirlwinds or hurricanes of the American South. Yet those who disbelieve his tale are suspicious of his descriptions of such great wealth and civilization, as well as his inclusion of fanciful creatures such as penguins and elephants. Had Ingram conflated dockside stories with his own to make the tale even more grand? Was there some fantastical explanation for him witnessing exotic species from Africa, Asia, or Antarctica? If we can accept that the entire east coast of North America was crowded with cities of 50,000 every few miles, perhaps we can believe that trade networks were also far more well-established than we understood. Other European accounts of North America in the 16th century indicate we know very little of what it looked like. We have even earlier travelogues from explorers such as Verrazano and Corte Real, but they have all been disputed over the years. Of David Ingram's account, while Elizabethan contemporaries such as Walsingham and Richard Hakluyt weren't entirely convinced of the explorer's claims. Perhaps the best defense one could provide for it is that Captain John Hawkins himself acknowledged the three men upon their return and rewarded them for their exploits. It would be of great interest to hear what Ingram, Brown, and Twide may have said to the man who abandoned them on the Mexican shore, but that exchange has been lost to time. What would have been worth even more is if they had been able to record their story in a way that wasn't only meant to satisfy the narrow demands of a court favorite and his colonizing scheme, but rather a full accounting of what was most likely a tremendous journey. Would that there were more. I have been fascinated by this tale for a number of years now, and I've gone so far as to contact the man who has done more than any other to test Ingram's claims. The British author Richard Nathan corresponded with me years after he completed the reverse of Ingram's journey, beginning in Newfoundland and ending in Mexico 11 months later. His attempt faced far different challenges than three men in the 16th century. While he succeeded in completing the journey, the land he visited had been so transformed it was nearly impossible to match any of Ingram's observations with the lands Nathan crossed. Most of the modern man's difficulties came from an excess of industrial development and endless walking on paved roads. But he proved the route could be completed, although he did it with the companionship of his dog instead of two men. The relation of David Ingram of Barking, in the county of Essex sailor, of sundry things which he with others did see, in travelling by land from the most northerly parts of the Bay of Mexico, where he with many others were set on shore by Master Hawkins, through a great part of America, until he came within 50 leagues or thereabouts of Cape Breton. About the beginning of October 1568, David Ingram, with the rest of his company, being 100 persons in all, were set on land by Master John Hawkins, about 5 leagues to the west of the river La Mina, or Rio de Minas, which stands about 140 leagues west and north from the Cape of Florida, who, traveling towards Cape Breton, spent about 12 months in the whole, and about 7 months thereof in those countries which lie toward the north of the river of May, in which time, as the said Ingram thinks, he traveled by land 2,000 miles at the least, and never continued in any one place above 3 or 4 days, saving only at the city of Ballina, where he stayed 6 or 7 days. There are in those parts, he reports, very many kings, commonly within 100 or 120 miles one from another, who are at continual wars together. The first king that they came before dwelt in a country called Quirica, who caused them to be stripped naked, and, wondering greatly at the whiteness of their skins, let them depart without further harm. The kings in those countries are clothed with painted or colored garments, and thereby you may know them, and they wear great precious stones, which commonly are rubies, being 4 inches long and 2 inches broad, and if the same be taken from them either by force or feint, they are presently deprived of their kingdoms. When they mean to speak with any person publicly, they are always carried by men in a sumptuous chair of silver or crystal, garnished with precious stones. And if you will speak with the king at your first approaching near to him, you must kneel down on both your knees, and then arise again and come somewhat nearer him within your length, then kneel down again as you did before. Then take of the earth or grass between both your hands, kissing the backside of each of them, and put the earth or grass on the crown of your head, and so come, and kiss the king's feet. Which circumstances being performed, you may then arise and stand by, and talk with him. The noblemen and such as be in special favor with the king do commonly wear feathers in the hair of their heads for the most part, of a bird as big as a goose, of russet color. And this is the best mark that this Ingram can give to know him by. There is in some of those countries great abundance of pearl, for in every cottage he found pearl, in some houses a quart, in some a pottle, in some a peck, more or less, where he did see some as great as a bean. And Richard Brown, one of his companions, found one of these great pearls in one of their canoes or boats, which pearl he gave to Monsieur Champagne, who took them aboard his ship and brought them to New Haven in France. All the people generally do wear bracelets as big as a man's finger upon each of their arms, and the like on the small of each of their legs, whereof commonly one is gold and two silver. And many of the women also one wear plates golden, covering their bodies in manner of a paper of curates, and many curates and chains of great pearl. The people commonly are of good favor, feature, and shape of body, of growth above 5 feet high, somewhat thick, with their faces and skins of color like an olive, and, towards the north, somewhat tawny. But some of them are painted with divers colors. They are very swift of foot. The hair of their heads is shaven in sundry spots, and the rest of their head is traced. In the southern parts of their country they go all naked, saving that the men's cover themselves with the uiki of gourd, and the women with the leaves of the plane tree. But in the north parts they are clothed with beasts' skins, the hairy side being next to their bodies in winter. They are naturally very courteous, if you do not abuse them, either in their persons or goods, but use them courteously. The killing or taking of their beasts, birds, fishes, or fruits cannot offend them, except it be of their cattle, which they keep about their houses, as kine, guinea hens, or such like. If any of them do hold by both their hands at length together, and kiss the backs of them, sure token on both sides, then you may trust them, for it is the greatest token of friendship that may be. If any of them that come into you with a horse-tail in his hand, then you may assure yourself that he is a messenger from the king, and to him you may safely commit your person, or go to the king, or anywhere else, or by him send anything or message to the king. For men are always either ensign flag-bearers in the wares, or the king's messengers, who will never betray you. To allure the people to speech, if you will have any of the people come aboard your ship, hang out some white cloth upon a staff, for thee is a sign of amity. If you will bargain for wares with them, leave the thing that you will sell upon the ground, and from it a pretty way off, then they will come and take it, and set down such wares as they will give for it in the place. And if you think it not sufficient, leave the wares with signs that you like it not, and they will bring more, until either they or you be satisfied, or will give no more. Otherwise, you may hang your wares upon a long pole's end, and so put more or less on it, until you have agreed on the bargain. When they go to the wars, they march in battle array, 2 and 3 in a rank. Their trumpets they do make of certain beasts' teeth. They have a kind of drum, which they make of beasts' skins. They have shields and targets of the skins of beasts, compassed with willow twigs, and, being dried, they are strong and defensible. Their weapons are darts, headed with iron. The heads are 2 fingers broad and half a foot long, which are fastened within a socket. They have also short bows, strung with barks of trees, being half-inch broad. Their arrows are of bone, a yard long, notched and beaded with silver bone, and their arrows are of small force within a stone's cast of them, and you may put them by with a staff a pretty way off. They have short broadswords of black iron of the length of a yard, or very near an ell, bearing edges thicker than backs of knives, somewhat like the foils in our fence schools. They have crooked knives of iron somewhat like a wood knife or hanger, wherewith they will carve excellently, both in wood and bone. Their flag figure is horsetail, with glass or crystal in some of them, being they in sundry colors, as red, yellow, green, etc. The people in those countries are professed enemies to the cannibals or men-eaters. The cannibals inhabit between Norumbega, Bari Mah. They have teeth like dogs' teeth, and thereby you may know them. In the wars they do pitch their camp as near as they may into some wood of palm tree, which yields them meat, drink, and present remedy against poisoned arrows. Their buildings are weak and of small force. Their houses are made round like dove houses, and they dwell together in towns and villages, and some of them have banqueting houses in the top of them, built with pillars of silver and crystal, framed square, whereof many of them are as big as a boy's leg of 15 years of age, and some less. Ingram did also see various towns and villages as Gunda, a town a flight shot in length. Gunda, a town a flight shot in length. Ocala, a great town, a mile long. Balma, a rich city, a mile and a half long. Bega, a country and town of that name, 3/4 of a mile long, where are good store of hides. Saguana, a town almost a mile in length. Bari Mah, a city a mile and a quarter long. Also there is a river and a town of that name, but less than the first above named. Gunda, a small town and a river, both of that name, and this is the most northerly part that this Ingram was at. There are besides those towns aforenamed many other great towns which this Ingram passed by, commonly distance 5 or 8 miles one from the other, which have divers small with large, within 8 or 10 miles from them. They have in every house scoops, buckets, and various other vessels of silver, wherewith they throw out water and dust, and otherwise do employ them to their necessary uses in their houses, all which this Ingram did see common and usual in some of these countries, especially where he found the great pearls. There are also great rivers, at the heads whereof this Ingram his companions did find sundry pieces of globe, some as big as a man's fist, the earth being washed away with the water. And in other places they did see great rocks of crystal, which grew at the heads of great and many rivers, being in quantities to load ships. There are also in those parts plenty of fine furs, unknown to this Ingram, are dressed in the manner of the country. The people there so burn a kind of white turf of earth, which they dig out of the marshes, a fathom deep in the ground. It burns very clear, and smells as sweet as musk, and that earth is as wholesome, sweet, and comfortable to smell unto as any pomander. They do make their fire of this earth for the sweetness thereof, having great abundance of wood. When they want fire, they take briars, and rub them very hard together between their fists, and so with hard and often rubbing they kindle and make fire. They have great plenty of iron, and there is also great plenty of mineral salt in the marine ground, which looks reddish, a thing necessary for the great fishing near the seashore, which are there abundant, and the fish very large and huge. The ground and country is most excellent, fertile, and pleasant, especially toward the river of May. For the grass of rest is not so green as it is in these parts, for the other is burnt away with the heat of the sun. And as all the country is good and most delicate, having great plains, as large as fair in many places as may be seen, being as plain as board, and then great and huge woods of sundry kinds of trees, as cedar, lignum vitae, bombassa, planes and bushes, bark that breach like pepper, of which kind young Winter brought home part from Strait of Magellan, with the fruitful palm tree, a great plenty of other sweet trees to this Ingram unknown. And after that, plains again, and in other places great closes of pasture, environed with most delicate trees instead of hedges, they being, as it were, set by the hands of men. Yet the best grass, for the most part, is in the high countries, somewhat far from the seaside, and great rivers, by reason that the low grounds there be so rich, that the grass grows faster than it can be eaten, whereby the old grass lieth withered thick, and the new grass growing through it. Whereas in the upper parts the grass and ground is most excellent and green, the ground not being overcharged with any old withered grass. The palm tree carries hairs on the leaves, which reach to the ground, from which the Indians do make ropes and cords for their cotton beds, and do use the same to many other purposes. The which tree, if you prick with your knife about 2 foot from the root, it will yield a wine in color like whey, but in taste strong, which is most excellent drink. But it will distemper both your head and body if you drink too much thereof, as our strong wines will one in these parts. The branches of a top of tree are most excellent meat raw, after you have pared away the bark. Also there is a red oil that comes out of the root of this tree, which is most excellent against poisoned arrows and weapons, for by it they do recover themselves of their poisoned wounds. There is a tree called a plantain, with a fruit growing on it like a pudding, which is most excellent meat raw. They have also a red berry, like a peas cod, called gayathos, 2 or 3 inches long, which growth on short bushes full of picks like the sloe or thorn tree, and the fruit tastes like a green raisin, but sharper somewhat. They stamp this berry, and make wine thereof, which they keep in vessels made of wood. They have also in many places vines which bear grapes as big as man's thumb. There is also great plenty of herbs, and of all kinds of flowers, as roses and gillyflowers, like ours in England, and many others which be new not. Also they have a kind of grain, the ear, whereof is as big as the wrist of man's arm. The grain is like a flat pea. It makes very good bread, and white. They are also make bread of the root called cassava, which they do dry, and beat it as small as they can, and temper it with water, and so bake it in cakes on a stone. There is also great plenty of buffaloes, bears, horses, kine, wolves, foxes, deer, goats, sheep, hares and conies, also other cattle like ours, the most part of those buffaloes, which are beasts as big as 2 oxen, in length almost 20 feet, having long ears like a bloodhound, with long hair about their ears, their horns be crooked like ram's horns, their eyes black, their hair long, black, rough, shagged as a goat. The hides of these beasts are sold very dear. This beast keeps company only by couples, male and female, and does always fight with others of the same kind when they do meet. There is also great plenty of deer, both red, white, and speckled. There is also great plenty of another kind of sheep with coarse wool. This sheep is very good meat, although the flesh be very red. They are exceedingly fat, and of nature loath to rise when they are laid down, which is always from 5 o'clock at night until 5 o'clock in the morning, between which time you may easily kill them. But after they be on foot, they are very wild, and rest not in one place, living together in herds, in some 500 more or less. And the red sheep are most about the Bay of St. Mary. There are bears, both black and white. There are wolves. The foxes have their skins more grizzled than ours in England. There are conies, both white and red, and gray in every place, great plenty. Ingram did also see in those countries a monstrous beast twice as big as a horse, and in proportion like to a horse, both in mane, hoof, bear, and neighing, saving it was small towards the hinder parts like a greyhound. These beasts hath 2 teeth or horns of a foot long, growing straight forth by their nostrils. They are natural enemies to the horse. He did also see in that country both elephants and ounces. He did also see one other strange beast bigger than a bear. He had neither head nor neck. His eyes and mouth were in his breast. This beast is very ugly to behold, and cowardly. It bears a very fine skin like a rat, full of silver hairs. There are in those countries abundance of russet parrots, but very few are green. There are also birds of all sorts as we have, and many strange birds. There are great plenty of guinea hens, which are tame birds, and proper to the inhabitants, as big as geese, very black of color, having feathers like down. There is also a bird called a flamingo, whose feathers are very red, and is bigger than a goose, built like a shoveler, and is very good meat. There is also another kind of fowl in that country, which hunts the rivers near into the islands. They are of the shape and bigness of a goose, but their wings are covered with fine yellow feathers, and cannot fly. You may drive them before you like sheep. They are exceeding fat and very delicate meat. They have white heads, and therefore the countrymen call them penguins, which seems to be a Welsh name. And they have also in use various other Welsh words, a matter worth noting. There is also a very strange bird, twice as big as an eagle, very beautiful to behold. His feathers are more orient than a peacock's feathers. His eyes are glittering as an hawk's eyes, but as great as man's eyes. His head and thigh as big as a man's. It hath a crest and tuft of feathers of sundry colors on the top of the head, like a lapwings hanging backwards. His beak and talons in proportion like eagles, but very huge and large. Touching tempests and other strange monstrous things in those parts, that Ingram hath seen it lighten and thunder in summer season by the space of 24 hours together, the cause where he judges to be the heat of the climate. He further said that there is a cloud, some time of the year, seen in the air, which commonly turns to great tempests, and that sometimes of the year there are great winds, in manner of whirlwinds. Touching their religion, he saith that then honored for their god a devil, which they call Coluccio, who speaks unto them sometimes in the likeness of a black dog, and sometimes in the likeness of a black calf. And some honor the sun, the moon, and the stars. He reports that the people in those countries are allowed many wives, some 5, some 10, and a king sometimes 100, and that adultery is very severely punished in the manner following. The woman taken in adultery must, with her own hands, cut the throat of the adulterer, and the next of his kin doth likewise cut the throat of the adulteress. And being asked in what manner they take their executions, He saith that they are brought to execution by certain magistrates, who do deliver unto the woman the knife, wherewith she cuts the throat of the adulterer. Then appears their coluccio, or devil, the likeness aforesaid, and speaks to them, and so that devil the parties brought to execution do great reverence, and with many prayers unto it they do take their death. Ingram said that such persons that are put to death in such sort have not any of their friends buried with them, but such as die naturally have always buried with them quick one of their dearest friends to keep them company, and to provide victuals for them, who do willingly consent to it, being by their coluccio or devil who they do worship. Ingram said further that he and his two fellows, namely Richard Brown and Richard Twide, went into a poor man's house, and there they did see the said coluccio, or devil, with very great eyes like a black calf, upon the sight whereof Brown said, There is the devil, and thereupon he blessed himself in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. And Twide said, very vehemently, I defy you, and all the works. And presently the coluccio shrank away in a stealing manner, and was seen no more unto them. Also they passed over many great rivers in those countries in canoes or boats, some 4, some 6, some 8, some 10 miles over, whereof one was so large that they could scarce cross the same in 24 hours. Also Ingram said that in the same country the people have instruments of music made of a piece of cane, almost a foot long, being open at both ends, which, sitting down, they smite upon their thighs and one of their hands, making a pleasant kind of sound. And they do have another kind of instrument like a tabor, covered with a white skin, somewhat like parchment. Ingram said he can very well describe their gestures, dancing, and songs. After long travail, the aforesaid David Ingram, with his two companions Brown and Twide, came to the bend of a river called Garinda, which is 60 leagues west from Cape Breton, where they understood by the people of that country of arrival of a Christian, whereupon they made their repair to the seaside, and there found a French captain named Monsieur Champagne, who took them into his ship, and brought them unto New Haven in France, and from there they were transported into England in the year 1569. This Monsieur Champagne, with various of his company, was brought into the village of Baryanate, about 20 miles up into the country by Ingram and his two companions. By whole means he had a take with the people of divers sorts of fine furs, and of great red leaves of trees almost a yard long, and about a foot broad, which he thinketh are good for dyeing. Also the said Monsieur Champagne had there, for exchange of trifling wares, a good quantity of rude and wrought silver. Ingram said further that divers of the said Frenchmen which were in the said ship, called the Gargarine, are yet lying in Honfleur upon the coast of France, as he thinks, for he did speak with some of them within 3 years. About a fortnight after coming from New Haven into England, Ingram and his two companions came to Master John Hawkins, who had set them on shore upon the Bay of Mexico, and unto each of them he gave a reward. Richard Brown, his companion, was slain about 5 years past, in the Elizabeth of Master Hawkins of London, and Richard Twide, his other companion, died at Ratcliffe, in John Sherwood's house there, about 3 years past. The language of some of the Indians. Guando. His a word of salutation as among us, good morrow, good even, God save you, and such like. Garicona, a king. Garcona, a lord. Tona, bread. Carmugnar, the. Caruca, the sun. Also David Ingram, traveling towards the north, found the main sea upon the north main of America, and travelled on the sight the space of 2 whole days, where the people signified unto him that they had seen ships on that coast, and did draw upon the ground the shape and figure of ships, and of their sails and flags, which thing specially proves the passage of the northwest, and is agreeable to the experience of Vasquez de Coronado, who found a ship of China or Cataya upon the northwest of America. Also Ingram said that there is an island called Curacao, and there are in it 5,000 or 6,000 Indians at the least, and those are governed by one black man, who is but a slave to a Spaniard. And moreover, the Spaniards will send but one of their slaves with 100 or 200 of the Indians when they go to gather gold in the rivers descending from the mountains. And when they that be absent by the space of 20 or 30 days at the least, every one of the Indians will nevertheless obey all the slaves' commandments with as great reverence as if he were their natural king, although there never a Christian near them by the space of 100 or 200 miles, which displays the great obedience of those people, and how easily they may be governed when they be conquered.